Ladies and gentlemen, President Trump got the entire Republican Party to defend him. New York Times, most GOP senators vote against Trump impeachment trial. Associated Press, GOP largely sides against holding Trump impeachment trial. New York Times, Republicans rally against impeachment trial, signaling likely acquittal for Trump. Of course they're going to acquit President Trump. His speech was protected under the First Amendment. There's a reason that the Attorney General of Washington, D.C. and the Mayor of D.C. haven't gone after Trump on any legal or haven't charged him with any criminal act. They can do so. The Attorney General can, for sure. But nobody, there's not a court of law in this country that would convict or even indict President Trump. And there hasn't been. Because not only did he use the word peaceful, but he had nothing to do with organizing any of those events that were horrendous, that I condemn. But those 5 people should be alive today, but President Trump had nothing to do with that. You can't say, well, his words compelled those people. His arguments alone. Don't you see what he was trying to say about what took place the past 2 months? Well, what do you think Democrats have been doing for 4 years with the Steele dossier? And Facebook ads. They spent 4 years, every single second, every single hour, every single day, every single week, talking about Trump in a Moscow hotel room. They said an incoming U.S. president enjoyed certain types of bodily fluids in a Moscow hotel room. And then they say, oh, how dare you. He's breaking norms and traditions. I don't remember President Obama or Bush or Bill Clinton. Well, Bill Clinton, that was later on with the bodily fluids. But I don't remember any incoming president. That's not a peaceful transition of power when you have the FBI director say, oh, yeah, by the way, we have a dossier on you. A dossier purchased by your direct political rival. I don't remember a 4-year investigation into how Facebook ads swung 2016 or, I don't remember a special counsel based on the memos of a disgruntled former director of the FBI. I don't remember any of that stuff. That's never happened before. They went after President Trump in the most nefarious way. And they set up and framed everyone around him. Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, Michael Flynn. He never worked with Russia. There's zero direct evidence. There's even the circumstantial evidence was purchased. So there was zero direct evidence at all. They outsourced a third-party tech firm to say that Russia infiltrated the DNC, which eventually forced Debbie Wasserman Schultz to resign for what she did to Bernie Sanders. Hit subscribe to this channel right this second. We're back, thank goodness, on our way to 200,000 subs. Tell your friends about this channel. Hit subscribe right now. If you want to support my voice long term, my Patreon is below. Ladies and gentlemen, they impeached President Trump initially on the first impeachment was having the audacity to ask another foreign leader to investigate Biden, whose son is being investigated by the federal government right now for potential laundering. That's a fact according to Politico. Biden's son is being investigated for a whole bunch of things, in addition to taxes, because the federal government wants to know how he got so rich so quickly. Now, the issue here is not whether they find something, because they should be able to find something. It's right there. They have all the emails. If they had all the emails from Jared Kushner or Eric Trump Jr. or Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr. saying, "Oh, thanks for helping broker a meeting between you and your father. Thanks for allowing us to meet your father, the sitting vice president." How can you use your influence on behalf of the company? I mean, you can't get more incriminating. You just can't get more incriminating. But again, they tried their best to suppress this. They impeached President Trump on the notion that there was no reason to investigate Biden. Then we find out the federal government has been investigating his son since 2018. And the story was suppressed. Twitter, which is, whether they were up today or not is completely irrelevant. And eventually that stock, that company, in the next couple of years is just going to tank. They have $3.4 billion in debt. They now want to go into subscription services because nobody wants to go. They're not making enough revenue. The revenue stream from advertising will eventually dry up. It's a boiling pot, this cauldron of discontent that has now alienated President Trump and 74 million Americans and millions around the world. So you do the math on that. And the debt is growing, so it's $3.4 billion, and it's continuing to grow. But anyway, they impeached President Trump initially on the audacity to investigate a politician whose son is already being investigated by the federal government. There should never have been a first impeachment. They impeached President Trump for something he had nothing to do with. They're trying to say that the nature of his arguments was so outlandish and so divisive that it got, that his supporters couldn't handle his words and had to, lash out at the government and create this kind of rebellion. Well, that's not what took place. That's not what took place at all. And it was, unfortunately, a protest that had nothing to do with President Trump. And it was a protest that lost control very quickly. And it was short-sighted, misguided, and the loss of life is the true tragedy. Those 5 people should be alive today. But he's in a court of law, they're not going to go after President Trump because he didn't tell people specifically to do anything. Like I said, they've been spending 4 years trying to undermine the legitimacy of President Trump's victory in 2016 and his presidency. Now, I find it so hilarious that now Democrats are governing. They have the executive, they have the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And they still can't get Medicare for all through. When is the next time they're going to have all 3, not the Supreme Court, no, but when's the next time they're going to have the House, the Senate, and the presidency? When's the next time? Because 2022, the House is going to go Republican. Okay? It was 10 seats down? Republicans gained seats? Republicans gained seats. So, and now there's a power sharing agreement in the Senate. And the Republicans that take over the House will be far more aligned with President Trump than the Paul Ryan Republicans. Trump did a lot more to revamp the Republican Party than Bernie Sanders ever did with Democrats. Bernie Sanders was a tool utilized by Democrats to funnel left-leaning votes back into the Democratic Party. That's what he was there for. He was a tool. So, and AOC did the same thing. They now have a chance to implement the Green New Deal legislation, not a resolution, Medicare for all, single payer. Why don't they do that? They're going after Jimmy Dore, the left, but the left they're a bunch of hypocrites. A lot of them. This is exactly what they wanted. They have complete control of the government. So why don't they implement Medicare for all? Oh, that's right, because it's the biggest grift of all time. Democrats have zero interest in implementing. They never had any interest in implementing Medicare for all. It was always a public relations stunt and ploy. So when you have Jimmy Dore forcing the issue and saying, hey, why don't we just have a floor vote? Why don't you vote on one of the bills that Bernie Sanders championed or one of the Medicare for all bills out there? Go ahead and vote. AOC says, oh, yeah, you can't because, gosh, there's procedural issues. Oh, yes. Oh, goodness. That's the reason. These bills, by the way, like the ACA was like hundreds and hundreds of pages. These bills are like thousands of pages long. I think they include procedural issues or rule changes. And so you have these absurd excuses. But now they have to govern. And they're not going to do what they said they were going to do. Democratic Party policies don't get left-leaning voters excited. Trump's policies, being the first president to step foot in North Korea, Abraham Accords, these things get Republican voters or get Trump supporters happy. We like world peace. We like a less interventionist regime change. We don't want regime change. We want a limit to military conflict. And we want to reverse 16 years of failed foreign policy disasters from the Lincoln Project people that pushed and sold Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld's foreign policy. So that's why you vote for Trump. And people say, how could you vote for Trump? That's like a question rooted in narcissism. Why don't you just take a second to think about the good things that Trump has done? President Trump allocated more funding to historically black colleges and universities than any president ever. So, I mean, he got a greater percentage of non-white voters than any president in the past 60 years, according to Newsweek. So, any Republican, I should say. So if he starts a third party, which he could, I mean, Republicans know that, Republicans now are caught between a rock and a hard place. They know that they have to support President Trump because that's where the party is moving. And Mitt Romney, Ben Sasse, Lisa Murkowski, they might get the positive media coverage, but at the end of the day, Democrats despise them. The Lincoln Project now is going after Ted Cruz. So I think that's their new, the new person they're going to obsess over. These are the same people, the Lincoln Project people, who helped Republicans run on a marriage amendment. These are the same people who, by the way, who pushed and sold and lied us into Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld's foreign policy. And so if Trump is responsible for what took place in D.C., are the Lincoln Project people directly responsible for all the suffering and sorrow and lives lost from the wars that they told, that they pushed for years and years during the Bush administration? So it's interesting. Democrats and anyone aligned with Democrats are never culpable for their decisions. They never hold responsibility. This is why the moral compass of Democrats is always spinning, yet they always feel morally superior. You have people who, for example, President Obama in Libya. There are endless articles in very prestigious publications talking about, God, Foreign Affairs has a great one, how Obama's well-meaning intervention. Here, let's just look really quickly. I mean, if Trump is responsible for what happened, let's see. Obama well-meaning. Here, Foreign Affairs. Obama's Libya debacle. How a well-meaning intervention ended in failure. Golly gee. It was well-meaning. I mean, it ended in failure, but it's the thought that counts. It's the thought that counts. The Atlantic. Legacy of Obama's worst mistake. It was a mistake. It was well-meaning. Don't you understand? Trump got impeached on something he had nothing to do with. He did not tell those people. He did not lead a NATO intervention. He did not tell those people to go into that building, and they shouldn't have done it. They shouldn't have done it. And I condemn that. They shouldn't have done that. My God almighty. It was the loss of life was the main issue, but my God, it was an unmitigated disaster in terms of politics. It was a catastrophe politically. The Democrats had that momentary control where they could silence people and ban Trump and all that stuff. If anything, the ban against Trump works in Trump's favor, actually. If you could limit the next 4 years, President Trump has to be a little bit more diplomatic, and there's no stopping him. That was the thing. He fell into a trap with Twitter, but now Twitter is going to tank because Trump's no longer there. But they impeached Trump on two things he had nothing to do with. Nothing directly to do with. There's no direct evidence that he caused any of the two things he was impeached over. Or there's no direct evidence that he pressured another country to do anything. If the pressure was actually Biden and $1 billion, but that's another story. Then they spin everything in their minds. This is hilarious. They don't treat the standard by which they judge Trump is definitely not the standard by which they judge themselves. That's for sure. Biggest hypocrites, many of them on the planet. But think about the mentality. How a well-meaning intervention ended in failure. Gosh. This is Foreign Affairs, The Atlantic. The Libya intervention, Obama's worst mistake. It was a mistake. It was a well-meaning intervention. There's been suffering and sorrow, and that country's divided now into two opposing factions with two opposing leaders. And the loss of life has been horrendous, and there have been massacres and tragedies, and there has been chaos and unrest and people being bought and sold. And is that President Obama? Like the New York Times, there are a great many certain writers in the New York Times that love to condemn Trump, but do they condemn President Obama? Your condemnation is worthless if you don't judge and condemn your own side for doing worse. They'll say, oh, well, it was a NATO intervention. I mean, other people share a culpability too. So what? NATO does what we tell them to do. What is NATO without the United States of America? Nothing. So, and then you have, look, human beings, Africans, USA Today are being sold as, human beings being sold in Libya. Thanks Hillary, USA Today. Human beings being sold in markets in Libya. So this is unbelievable. And everything's, here's what's, human beings being bought and sold. Here's what you need to know, Time magazine. Oh, interesting. Is Obama to blame 2017? Is he to blame? And so he calls it the worst mistake. When you break a state and then don't stick around to rebuild it, you create a failed state. The professor who's, and so that's isn't even the worst thing that's going on. Here, so, and then they say, one expert says the Obama administration saved lives because the despot was going to destroy a city. Hello, there have been numerous cities destroyed because of what took place in the NATO intervention. So they did no good. How do you find one expert that says save the lives of thousands of people? But far more people lost their lives. Far more people. Look up the tragedy that took place in Libya. So how do you absolve? It makes no sense at all. You're talking about saving one city and then having almost every other city in the country obliterated, or a great percentage of the cities. I shouldn't say obliterated, but caught within this horrendous situation. So anyway, give me your thoughts below. I can get into it, but these articles and the story is, again, this is an example, ladies and gentlemen, of how a great many liberal Democrats are not morally superior in any way. They have their moral superiority stems from a great deal of narcissism and ignorance. If you blame Trump for what happened in D.C., are you going to blame Obama for what happened in Libya? Because he is far more directly responsible for the catastrophe and causing that country to be a failed state than anything Trump did in Washington. He didn't tell those people to do anything. President Obama led a NATO intervention, toppled a despot, and then the exact opposite of what he wanted. Well, he wanted to save lives. More lives were lost. So do you? And he even says it was my worst mistake. So he himself states, yeah. And that's what Democrats do. It's the Bill Clinton thing. Oh my goodness, I'll take responsibility. I'll take responsibility. Therefore, I'm absolved of any guilt. It's good to take responsibility. Yeah, that's good. But there also has to be an understanding that if your actions cause a country to become a failed state, then you should be held accountable. Nobel Prize removed? Maybe? I don't know. Impeached? Well, Trump is no longer president. You going to impeach President Obama for the NATO intervention? The Democrats would never do that. Because they say, well, Bush did worse. Yeah. Give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe right now. Republicans are defending President Trump, and it's about time. Give me your thoughts.